In one of your books, or many of your books, you talk about the eye of body, eye of mind, eye of spirit.
Okay.
And I'm wondering if, well, there are obviously two different bodies. There are men's bodies and women's bodies. So if
There's what?
Men's bodies and women's bodies.
Right.
So I'm wondering, thinking about, is there an eye of a woman's body, eye of a woman's mind, eye of a woman's spirit, eye of a man's body, eye
Yep.
and
Yep.
do you feel that they ascend in parallel or converge or cross or or what?
Yeah. I hope they cross on occasion. Next to pizza, I mean, that's a standard joke. It's like pizza and sex. You know, there's no bad pizza or sex. I like that. It's like it's the only two things that joke ever comes up about. Part of the great difficulty that we've had to face over the last 30 years as we were watching the influx of Eastern and Western, and Eastern means Western contemplative as well. There's a Western esoteric tradition that's quite rich, just a tad richer in the East, and is still officially accepted in culture at large, by and large. Whereas it's for various reasons in the modern West, it became a little bit harder to define officially. So part of our difficulty was terminology. So let me start with the first part. Now, when I wrote about the eye of flesh, eye of mind, eye of contemplation, that was a way to actually just introduce some simple notions into a world that was using only the eye of flesh, and I would add the eye of masculine flesh, to deliver statements of what is really, really, really real. And if you can't see it with the eye of flesh, it's not real. And so even theoretical formulations, rational, had to be tied to the eye of flesh and sensory data. And if it wasn't there, it wasn't there. So this was the downside of modernity. There were positive aspects of the modern Western Enlightenment, and there was a downside. The downside was if you only hook what's real to a rational view with the eye of flesh, then you get scientific materialism. And it's a very masculine scientific materialism. I mean, women can do scientific materialism, but it involves like Prada shoes and a lot of really cool shit down there. For men, it's like much more boring. But it's still, you can do the eye of flesh either way. So, but that's one part about it. We were trying to just introduce the fact that you could have an eye of mind and an eye of spirit. Second crinkle to add. And you use body, which is I'm going to use that term right now. To use this eye of body, eye of mind, eye of spirit. Actually, there are three bodies, each of which goes with those consciousness states. If you actually tease it out just a little bit more, which we would want to do now to make sense out of it, then in the upper right, there's a gross body, a subtle body, and a causal body. And the upper left, there's consciousness relating to that. Typically it can be waking, dream, and deep sleep state, or Nirmanakaya, Sambhogakaya, Dharmakaya, or it's sensory, mental, spiritual. But they still have bodies on the right. And again, yes, masculine and feminine. The simplest symbol that ties those together, in my mind, is still the caduceus. And it's one of my favorite symbols because it addresses exactly your issues. And as far as I'm concerned, it kind of gives an initial resolution to them. See if it works for you. And that is the caduceus, that the medical symbol of this thing, is actually representative of the esoteric anatomy in human beings. So it often has exactly 7 twists. So there's 7 chakras. And the chakras represent these levels of consciousness, only 3 of which in the simple version would be eye of flesh, eye of mind, eye of contemplation. But the chakras, like he actually subdivided them into 7. And every level has a masculine and feminine component, Ida and Pingala, or solar and lunar. And I think that's exactly what we have to look at. That's a much more accurate integral view. So at every level, there's a masculine and a feminine version of it. So the first chakra has a masculine and feminine version, second chakra masculine and feminine, third chakra masculine and feminine. And the masculine and feminine are generally described, and again, we can have discussions about what would be more appropriately the characteristics of those. But it's often that the masculine is a little bit more agentic, a little more autonomous. Female is a little bit more embodied, a little more relational, a little more tactile, prehensive. But that goes all the way up to the top. So it's not that there's feminine here and masculine here or anything like that. It's an absolute equivalence, which I think is really astonishing. Then the wings at the top represent sort of the two hemispheres of the brain where it explodes into a 1,000-petal thing. And then men and women sort of disappear into that. There's an energetic and consciousness component to each of the chakras, and a masculine and feminine component. And if you do all of those, you get a much more integrative way. And that's obviously, that would be what we would be trying to represent. But that representation right now contains so many qualities that are absolutely not understood by official scientific materialism, that even introducing one or two of them is considered outrageously far out. So I just was going for, just give us eye of flesh, eye of mind, eye of spirit, and I'll be a happy boy. I mean, that was such a good start. And I tell you, that was written almost 30 years ago. And there were two papers that I wrote about the same time that still to this day, and certainly back then, opened so many doors for so many people in terms of understanding and also getting into academia. One was that piece, Three Eyes or Three Eyes of Knowing. And one was the pre-trans fallacy, which we confuse pre-rational and trans-rational. And that opened up an enormous number of doorways as well. And again, you could do the same thing with that simple. You could divide it into masculine and feminine and give a much more fleshed out version. But at the time, those two simple concepts, for probably 5 or 6 years, were an anchor point around so many people could sort of get some traction against the reductionistic stances that were going on. Yeah.
Is there a more appropriate integral path for women?
Yeah.
And a more appropriate integral path for men? And my feeling is we don't understand either one of them particularly. We have the dead white guys that we all, throw everything in there and hope that covers humanity. Yeah. But we really haven't studied. There are no men's studies. Yeah. And then what happens with women's studies. And so I'm wondering if at some point you and your group are going to explore some more of, well, what's a path for, let's call it yang instead of masculine. Yeah. A path for men.
Yeah, well, we have two things. And you're right. It's nobody knows anything about anything, and that's why I used to summarize integral psychology as the ultimate secret is that nobody knows why anybody does anything, and that's after 300 years of studying it. So you can imagine what a new topic, how much we know about that. Sir Arthur Eddington, when the Heisenberg uncertainty principle was first trying to be formulated, this again was in like 1920s, and it was radically new to them back then. As you can imagine, they were coming out of a Newtonian world and getting plunked into this weird quantum world. And so after several years of that, and Einstein and Planck and all of that, Eddington summarized it by saying, something unknown is doing we don't know what. And I sort of feel the same way about these studies, So I'm a little suspicious of people that come out with their 12 books on masculine and feminine spirituality and stuff. I think something unknown is doing we don't know what.